We will begin with Father Rohr and then moving down to the left. Can you tell us, please, about your personal faith and science background? Tell us a little bit about the tradition that you were handed and how you came to your understanding of those issues originally.
All right. Excuse me, fighting allergies like a lot of us are. They're not any better here than New Mexico.
Oh man, right? Worse. If you came looking for allergy relief, you should get on the next plane.
Okay, well, I'm very happy to be here with you. I represent and was formed by a group that's sort of a subset within the great monolith called Roman Catholicism, and we call ourselves Franciscans. We prided ourselves in what we called in-house an alternative orthodoxy. When Catholicism was the only game in town, you had to find ways to hide out inside the system and to avoid the Inquisition or whatever else it might be. And those became the religious orders, frankly. You've heard of Jesuits, Carmelites, Dominicans, Sisters of Mercy, Franciscans. And they gave me a wonderful education, really, where before they dare to put the Word of God, the Scriptures, in our hands, we were formed in philosophy, how to think. They said it was dangerous to tell young men to think about God before they knew how to think, because they'd invariably use the Word of God for their own purposes, for their own self-aggrandizement, which I don't think needs a lot of proof when we see what we've done with the Scriptures in history. So one of those major courses was philosophy of science. But I can't say I was ever educated in science. It was just that, I don't know how much you know about St. Francis. You've probably seen him in bird baths and gardens. But he is the patron of ecology. But he wrote what is considered, if you take an Italian literature course, the first piece of Italian poetry. It's called The Canticle to Brother Sun. And he's the first known, I'm sure there must have been others, but recorded Christian to dare to call the animals and the elements by the term of brother and sister. Sister Fox, brother fire, sister air. The whole world was subject to subject. It wasn't subject to object. And so that got us off on a very good start, where we were able to take the natural world as the first creation. In fact, that's what we were taught. The primary Bible was creation. Starting in Genesis 1, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was good, it was very good. But our great disappointment, looking at our own Christian tradition, was that most Christians began with Genesis 3 instead of Genesis 1. Which was to begin with the problem instead of to begin with what we now call original blessing. So that tradition of original blessing, the honoring of the divine presence in material reality, was very much our thing. But it didn't win out. It certainly wasn't the dominant Christian position. In fact, I'd go so far as to say that nature, and science included, was the missing element in so much of Christian theology. It's like we fell in love with books more than reality. And we were the very people who believed the Word became flesh. And we reversed it right back and made the flesh back into words. And then we argued about the words. But it was represented in the early, if you go to Oxford, there's still a street called Roger Bacon Lane. Roger Bacon was an early Franciscan who is called the father of experimental science. Because of Francis's honoring the material world, we never had this bias against the material world. And let me just end by saying, it seems to me that what happened, I call the Great Decoupling. What was coupled together in almost all ancient native religions, that matter and spirit reflected one another. They were one world. We became, I've often said, more followers of Plato than Jesus. You see no idea like this in Jesus, that matter and spirit are separate. He was a good Jew, and he knew it was one world. But pretty much, I remember, in fact, the last day of my church history course in 1969, my professor, who I'd had for 4 years, is backing out of the room with a huge stack of books. And the very last thing he says, just remember, guys, the Christian church was more formed by Plato than it was by Jesus. Now, he meant to shock us. He was an Italian. He could get away with that. But we knew what he was saying, that in Jesus, the good Jew, there was no competition between the outer world and the inner world. They mirrored one another. But in Plato, they were enemies of one another. And we can't underemphasize how much we lived in a split universe. What was coupled together, we decoupled, and we made the outer world and the inner world in opposition to one another, dealing with the very thing we're going to address here. So I'm grateful to be a part of the tradition that tried, in our very feeble way, but tried to put them back together, and put them back together because they'd never really been apart in a happy way. So we didn't have to fight it. We just had to try to exemplify it.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Sure.
Rabbi Harris, tell us a little bit about your personal background in faith and science, the tradition that you're in, and how you respond to that.
Thank you, and thank you very much for welcoming me here this evening. It truly is a privilege. So my personal background in faith and science, I feel like I have to say, my sister is a chemist. She does pharmaceutical research for a big farm company. So PhD in chemistry, she was in academia for a long time. So I feel like that gives me some science credentials, even though I really don't understand what she does.
I have a brother who's an opera singer, and I do the same thing.
I don't get it, but I think it's mutual, though.
Yeah.
And an uncle, a great uncle, my grandmother's brother, also a scientist, now retired, but he taught at UC San Diego for a long time. Science is just a part of how I was raised and my family, and learning and expectations. I'm sure that you know that the number of people who are Nobel laureates who are also Jewish is a disproportionate number to the number of Jews in the world. Part of that is also science. I come from a tradition that takes learning and scientific learning very seriously, and I'll talk later, I think, about how I understand that, or how I understand the relationship between science and faith, how I explain it. So my own background was that I was not raised in an observant Jewish home. I was raised in what's called, in our circles, a secular Jewish home. So during Passover, we had matzah, but it doesn't mean that we didn't necessarily have other bread foods in the house. Or at Hanukkah, we had Hanukkah, and Yom Kippur, we didn't eat, but we didn't belong to a congregation. We didn't have regular religious observance. The way that I was raised was partially that people who cling heartily to religion are a little naive about the realities of the world and science, that because they aren't looking at the scientific realities, that there are people who think that all science is in the Bible, and it was kind of a wink, wink, nod, we know that's silly. I have other ways of understanding it today, but where I know that there are some religious people who are raised with a fear of science or a distrust of science, I had exactly the opposite experience, a fear or a distrust of religion and religious observance. So in my own learning, that was always something that had to be explained and understood as to what is this book of the Bible if it is not, and I do not believe that it is, if it is not a science book. And that was a piece of my learning in graduate school as to what it means to be a person of faith who has a relationship both with God and with Holy Scriptures, and to be a person who celebrates scientific advancement and, in fact, says things, I say things very regularly like, well, that's why God invented the microwave, etc., which I actually believe, but we'll talk more about that later.
I think my mother believes that too.
I'll explain why I think that later when that question comes up. So, I mean, my own study in science, I would say, is fairly low level. We laugh. One of my daughters, who's a junior in high school, is taking physics in high school, and I kind of laugh and tell her the one physics class that I took was when I was an undergrad, and I took physics for the non-physics major. That was me. Math for the elementary school teacher, which is great if you don't want to go beyond division. So my personal knowledge is not vast outside of lay knowledge of science, but that reconciliation of science and faith is something that I most certainly have worked on, perhaps from outside of the circle that we usually think about in faith communities.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Dr. Hoekman, speaking of vast personal knowledge of science, can you tell us a little bit about your personal background in science and faith, what kind of tradition you were born into, or how that experience has shaped you growing up to where you are?
Yes, and it's great to be here as well, so thank you for the invitation. I was a missionary kid in Nigeria. That's where my personal faith journey started.
The first time I saw you, I thought, Nigerian.
Yeah, it's a common reaction.
I had you pegged.
So my dad was a chemist, so he did some pharmaceutical development as well. He was in Nigeria teaching chemistry. My mom was there as a medical doctor and training medical practitioners there. They actually met there, so they came independently. They were working with Christian Reformed World Missions. That was the agency. And when we came back to the States, I was raised primarily in West Michigan, kind of where the Christian Reformed Church is a big thing. You can grow up in West Michigan and kind of imagine that the Christian Reformed Church is the only thing. It's a Calvinist tradition, and one of the things they really stress is education. So there's a lot of private schools there. I benefited from the Holland Christian school system in primary school and secondary school. And so integrating faith and science, faith and education in general was a part of growing up there. I went off to Wheaton College, which is a non-denominational liberal arts college in Illinois, and I studied archaeology and biology there. And then I did a PhD at Notre Dame in ecology. And then we traveled around, we did a postdoc, we worked for a nonprofit, and so we were kind of at different Christian Reformed churches around the country. We started a family, got married. And now I teach at Southern Nazarene University, so I'm coming to appreciate the Wesleyan tradition more as I get to know it better. We've also been attending Grace Episcopal Church in Yukon, so I've been coming to appreciate that tradition as well.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Father Rohr, I think we'll start again with you and once more work our way down the table. Tell us about why you have particular passion and interest in relating science and faith to each other. I know that you've talked some about the order that you're a part of and how that has been valued for a long time. How do you communicate that to people outside of your order? And why are you so passionate about having those kinds of conversations?
Wow. Well, I don't know that I am doing it that well, but we're getting great encouragement, of course, from Pope Francis now in our church, whose last encyclical, Laudato Si, is a total call to the Christian world. He addresses it not to Catholics, but to the world, that we better wake up very quickly to what we're doing. And I think makes the case very strongly that it is a faith issue. It is a spiritual issue. If the very ground that's feeding us and that we're all walking on, if we don't have this in common, what else do we have in common? It becomes the moral imperative literally right beneath our feet. So, if religion thinks that it's talking about the why And that's what we try to talk about. Why does this all mean something? It seems that the reason we've lost a lot of credibility is that we can't talk to the people who are talking about the how. And I don't know why we're so threatened by people who talk about the how. You'd think that would enrich our conversation. And it's never made much sense to me why they're a threat to us. There are two different levels of the conversation. They're not in opposition to one another. So, the book I'm starting to write now is going to be for Christians to clarify the notion of the Christ. I would be willing to bet that 95% of Christians across denominational lines think Christ is Jesus' last name, right? And they don't realize that our own scriptures, Colossians, Ephesians, the prologue to John's Gospel, all say that Christ existed from all eternity. And it took the form of holy wisdom, Sophia, in the Hebrew scriptures. I'm convinced, and I'm going to try to make the case for this if I can, that I believe creation itself is the feminine incarnation for Christians. And Jesus became the masculine incarnation personified for Christians. But because we just made it his last name, I would put it this way. I think we're still in baby Christianity. And the first 2,000 years, we've mostly struggled with who is Jesus. But Jesus was decoupled from Christ. And Christ is a universal metaphysical principle about the nature of matter and spirit working as one. The anointed mystery of reality. And there, in fact, we could have such easy conversation with the other world religions instead of seeing ourselves in competition with them or needing to steal sheep, as Christians used to say. That's pretty much a waste of time once you recognize that the Christ mystery is eternal, is ubiquitous, it's not tribal. It's not a territorial religion. It's about naming how matter and spirit coincide. Now, we happen to be the people who believe that incarnation that first happened 14 billion years ago then became personified in the person of Jesus. But we fell so in love with what we felt was the personification that we didn't pay much attention to the first Bible, nature, creation, the feminine incarnation of reality itself. So that's what excites me. If I could communicate that in any way, that would make me very happy. Because I think it's the only way if we're going to call our Jesus the Savior of the world, well, the way we're presenting him now, he's not the Savior of the world. He's the Savior of a country club tribe that thinks it's saved. And when we separate ourselves by our supposed superiority, instead of saying, hey, we're in common about this reality, we're not your enemies, we're nobody's enemies, we're just trying to name reality truthfully and saying matter and spirit are one. But we overplayed the Jesus card. It's like matter and spirit were one in him. Humanity and divinity were one in him, but not in the rest of reality, not in you and not in me. Well, unless the transference is made that he's the stand-in for everything, for everybody, which is the Christ mystery, I don't think Christianity can get very far in being a part of this scientific conversation, interfaith conversation. So it's exciting that we can be living now to talk this way, and that you haven't walked out yet. Maybe some of you want to, but I feel we've got to talk this way if we're going to indeed be brothers and sisters to one another and to the earth and to the animals and everything else.
Thank you very much. Rabbi Harris, tell us about why you're so passionate about relating science and faith, and maybe a little bit how your own tradition, your education, and your expertise kind of inform that passion.
So it's interesting to me because it's not probably an area that I would say that I'm passionate about. I think it falls into another area in which I'm passionate, and there's kind of an overlap. And that is that I think that there are eternal values that are taught in our faith traditions, but in any given generation, we get them wrong. So that I might read a text and think, oh, this so obviously says ... And then 30 years later, look at the same text and think, oh my goodness, what was I thinking? That is not applicable to the world as we know it. It's not that the text was wrong, it's that my understanding of the text was wrong. Or it was right in its time. My understanding of the text was right in its time. And something has changed in this time that the previous understanding doesn't address. So I think that that comes up a lot with science. So for instance, to use medical science, there's a lot of conversation. So we have responsa literature in Judaism, and basically somebody writes a letter to a religious legal authority that they respect, and they say, I work in a home that has many elderly people living there, and I'm wondering what are the parameters of offering CPR if one of our very frail residents were to fall and we think that CPR might save his or her life, but we don't really know, and they're quite frail, and we know that we're going to break ribs, and we know that we're going to do physical damage, and what are we supposed to do about that? Or medical science, my loved one is considering end-of-life issues, or I'm considering end-of-life issues. What do we do about life support? Once life support is given, can we take it away? How do we determine that somebody is dead? What kind of information do we need to make that decision? And if the brain scans all come out that the person is brain dead and the only thing that is giving them life is the machine that is pumping, can we discontinue? We can do so much more, and we know so much more today because of science, that questions that at one time never would have been asked are asked in very important ways for dealing with death. For instance, another big one is end-of-life physician-assisted suicide. That's a huge question that people have. Why can't I? Is really, from a Jewish perspective, the answer is that we don't support it. But there are sure a whole lot of Jewish people who wish that that the religious authorities would say that we do. So those kinds of questions where we have to take the religious values as we understand them today and how we've understood them in the past, and where we think we're going to go in understanding them in the future. That, to me, is a really interesting question and ties into a question of revelation, ties into what God reveals, what we invent, what we learn, and how what we think are religious values in the Jewish tradition we say from Sinai, right? We also have melodies and tunes that have been passed down from Sinai, even if they were written in like the 1970s. So things, for real. So things that we think are eternal truths, it has always been this way, that when we have medical science advancing, when we have agricultural science advancing, what do we do about genetically modified foods? All of these things, do we check our religious values at the door? How do we understand how they adapt, change, or insist that we say no to some advancements?
Thank you very much. Dr. Hoekman, why are you passionate about even having this conversation that includes both science and faith? And how does your education, how do your experiences shape your understanding of why that's so important?
Yeah, so I guess, I'm a college professor at Southern Nazarene University, and one of the things I love about that is the holistic approach of doing education in the context of a faith community where we don't have to check our religious beliefs at the door. As you say, it's very purposefully part of what we do in all of our courses. One of the things I'm passionate about is I get to teach field-based courses, so we're outside studying the birds or studying the insects or these sorts of things, and helping students to see and appreciate some of God's general revelation. That's one of the things I love about teaching biology. And then there's two other courses I would highlight as kind of things that I'm passionate about that really excite me about having these conversations with students and in a classroom setting. So one is Origins. The topic of the first discussion of the Two Windows project was about creation and evolution. So we have a course called Origins where we talk about cosmology and biological evolution, but we also talk about some philosophy of science, some of the nature of science and religion, some of the ways that Christians have understood the early chapters of Genesis. So that's a really formative class and a difficult class for some students, but some really important conversations that we get to have and topics that are really important to unpack together. And the other one that maybe relates more to this conversation is called Environmental Sustainability. And that's a paired course, so it's for freshmen, and we pair courses up. This one is paired with Christian Faith and Life. And so we share some readings, we share some assignments between the two courses. And it's a really fun class, too. We investigate a bunch of different environmental science issues. We learn the science behind them. But then we also think about how do we respond to these issues with taking our faith into consideration explicitly. What sort of responsibilities do we have toward creation? How do we be better servants of creation? So asking those questions with students is what I'm really passionate about and why I love having these conversations.
Excellent. Thank you so much. We're going to do at least one more round of questions for our panelists before we take our break. Keep in mind, as you have questions, text them to the number, and we'll get to those in the second half. So now is your big chance to weigh in. Okay. Father Rohr, when you talk about the relationship between science and faith, if you are explaining that to a layperson, do you have a favorite way of doing that? Do you have an example that you point to that says, this is how science and faith overlap and play well together? What is that like for you?
You do have to talk with real nuance and delicacy, because we're coming from centuries of them being so separate that the assumption is they're not one, and you have to go almost, I hate to be an apologist or on the offensive to make the point, but you're almost forced to do that because of the centuries of developing on different highways with a very different vocabulary, and most of us tend to get one kind of education or the other. So what do? I don't know that I have any planned. My sphere is clearly theology. So my desire was always to clarify the scriptures and the tradition. The advantage I had, and this is the good meaning of being Catholic, if you need a good meaning for it. The word Catholic means universal. And it was already taken by Ignatius of Antioch in the year 108. It wasn't Roman Catholic yet. It was, we are the Catholic people. And he was traveling from Antioch to be martyred in Rome, and he went through Asia Minor, and he stopped in village after village after village, and all these people were becoming Christian at that time, that early, not all, but in great numbers. And he said, this is destined to be a universal message. So I think the teachers who taught me took that very seriously. And I wasn't given the conclusions, the Catholic conclusions, but I was given the history of theology. So we studied the Hebrew Scriptures just as much as the New Testament. We studied the intertestamental period, the whole 2,000 years. And being given that, and the history of the Reformation, what was good about it, what was problematic, the history of the Catholic Church, what was good about it, what was problematic. It was almost a training in non-dual thinking, in mystical thinking, to recognize every single reform has had its problems. And unless you can critique it from the inside, you're not going to get the big picture. Now, I believe Jesus' word for the big picture, Christians are familiar with it, is the kingdom of God, or the reign of God. So both from Jesus and from my own Catholic tradition, I have a passion for the big picture, right? And I think that's what religion should be about, but not in a dominating way, in an examining way. Your own tradition taught me the beauty of midrash. You know, how our Jewish ancestors, our friends, can open a scripture together and say, well, it could mean this, could mean that. What about this? Let's try on that. And you just leave the conversation so enriched compared to many Christian conversations where there's one literal meaning. Brothers and sisters, Augustine already in the 4th century says there's a minimum of 4 and probably 8 levels. We went backwards. We were much more open to the symbolic meaning, the allegorical meaning, the metaphysical meaning, the spiritual meaning. And you know what? The literal meaning was the one that was considered the least helpful and the least truthful, because it was too tied to literalism, whereas what religion flourishes in is the world of symbolism, because the symbol is what evokes the soul and opens up the heart, not fighting about there's only one literal interpretation. And we've got to say that at this point strongly, because it's why so many of the younger generation are not even giving Christianity a hearing anymore. They're so tired of our argumentation. There's nothing really to argue about once you learn the contemplative mind, but you just see things in their wholeness, in their depth, in their beauty, in their invitation. And that's, I think, what the Franciscans gave me, but it's not the American way of thinking. I mean, you want to talk about being countercultural or counterintuitive. It's our tradition. But I don't know how many of us are educated in the great tradition. It seems that, I say this unkindly, forgive me, but some Christians I met give me the impression that Christianity began in Alabama in 1950, you know? And that's nothing against Alabama. All right, I just had to pick on some arbitrary state, but the lack of sense of being a part of God's whole cosmos, being a part of God's whole history is embarrassing at this point for people who call themselves Catholic or people who call themselves lovers of the universal Christ. If he is, then we better start following him in his understanding of what he loved. And if God is God, it seems to me God is expert in loving more and more, not less and less. That's probably enough.
Rabbi Harris, talk to us a little bit about how, to a layperson, you might articulate the importance of faith and science. Do you have a go-to example? Do you have a way that you point to and say, here's how these two ideas that it seems that we hold in tension really do play well together? How do you think about those things or explain those kinds of things?
So in Judaism, there is no great credit earned if you come up with some incredible understanding all by yourself on your own. Nobody thinks that's such a good thing in Jewish thought. In Jewish thought, it's all about the shoulders that you stand upon and that person's, who that person is relying on all the way back. The more ancient you can look, the better. That's a big deal for us. So when I think about God speaking, for all time, and I'm probably in the camp of a non-theist. I believe strongly and fully in God, but not very much in a personal God who actually is paying attention to my moment right now or needs me in particular. I need God more than God needs me, for sure. But when I think about Revelation and how God continues to speak today, I think about how the things that we create, lowercase c, the things that we invent, the things that we understand, the things that all of a sudden somebody came up with the idea of chemotherapy. And in 100 years, we're probably going to look back and think, they did what to people? But for right now, we're really thankful when it works. And that, to me, is ongoing revelation. God continues to reveal God's self through the revelation of scientific advancement that can better humanity. So, I don't know the climate of where I sit right now, and I guess there's always
I think it's about 72 degrees.
Yeah, thank you.
And
72
just so you know,
degrees and a good day to vaccinate your children
yes,
from a
always
Jewish
one of those.
perspective. That's how I do it.
No, it's great. I love that. Dr. Hoekman, tell us a little bit about how, from your perspective, you like to explain this relationship between faith and science, and maybe explain a little bit about how they do indeed play well together from a scientific perspective.
Yeah, so I think that the two windows metaphor is a great one. Science and religion looking at the same world around us, but through different lenses. That's a helpful metaphor. I guess I think of them as being really focusing on different sorts of questions primarily. That faith we're often concerned with the why and the who, especially kind of the big picture, like as you say. And that in science we're more interested in the how and the when and looking for mechanisms. And I really see those as complementary ways to ask questions. I know that in my work as an ecologist, it's brought me to many different beautiful places, and the food webs that I study, the ecosystems that I'm interested in, it's definitely heightened my appreciation for the Creator when I am out trying to understand the mysteries of the creation. So for me, that they come together in a powerful way.
Excellent. Thank you so much. For each of the members of the panel, I think we'll start here. Dr. Hoekman, we'll begin with you and then head this direction. What are some common misconceptions about faith and science and how they interact or do not interact?
I think within faith communities, the common misconception is that scientists do not have faith or don't share their faith, and that there's some antagonism from scientists toward people of faith. That's not to say that there isn't any, or that all scientists have a deep faith. But the scientists that I have met who have a bone to pick, so to speak, with religion.
Wait, was that an archaeology joke?
Thank you. They're all folks who grew up in the church and somewhere along the line got burned and have decided that's not for them. But there are a lot of people I have met in the academy doing, studying in different places, doing postdocs, doing graduate study, who are not people of faith. I have never met anyone who is antagonistic toward me because of my faith. The academics are, by and large, really respectful of people's personal faith. So that's one misconception. Again, not to say there isn't any antagonism, but scientists as a whole, I have a hard time finding any who have any problem with me and my personal faith. And I guess a misconception among scientists of people of faith is, I think that there are some misconceptions about that people of faith are somehow detached from reality, that that we believe kind of ridiculous things, and that we are, not living in the same shared reality as everyone else. And there are some ways in which that is true. So maybe it's not all a misconception.
Thank you. Rabbi Harris?
I agree with everything that you just said. I would add that I think that there's a misconception that faith should be scientific. And what I mean is that, at least for the scientists that I know, it's not like they wake up in the morning and say, oh, here is exactly how the world is ordered, boom, 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 and overnight I figured out how, we were just talking about the Galapagos Islands. Here, overnight I figured out how evolution might have worked. Like, let's just, come up with that. It's a lot of trial and error to be a scientist. It's a lot of experimentation. It's a lot of learning from those who came before you and building on their shoulders and their theories. And in that way, I think that religion is scientific, because our religious paths take us in all of these different experimental directions in trying to figure out what's the difference between the eternal truths, the truths that are for just today, the truths that, turned out to be kind of falsehoods. We're constantly experimenting with that. And so to the degree that people think that faith should be scientific because we should just be able to plot it all out and explain exactly how God works, science isn't scientific like that. So why should faith be? And I think that they're both quite the same in that way.
Wow, good. It seems to me that we have two different entrance points. We have different vocabulary, and we have a different method for knowing. In the first 1,000 years of Christianity, the most common word for this different way of knowing, which was more intuitive, more patient, more non-dualistic, was contemplative, to know things contemplatively. It's different than the calculating rational mind. Now, once the Enlightenment emerged, 17th and 18th centuries, and we saw the immense brilliance of these rational scientists moving all over Europe, we Christians became very insecure because we wanted to be a part of the conversation. And so many accepted the dualistic distinction. If it's not rational, it's irrational. In fact, what healthy religion is non-rational. That's different than irrational. It's a different entrance point. It's a different way of knowing than the logical exclusion of opposites, where you hold the opposites together. Many have said that every great doctrine or dogma of Christianity, at least, has a paradoxical character to it. Jesus is fully human and fully divine. That makes no sense to the rational mind. The intuitive mind can hold it together. And if we don't, I think, rediscover that older way of knowing called contemplation, I don't know that we're going to be able to be respected, because we're going to keep fighting an enemy that isn't there, needing to prove that we can be as rational as you can. That's been the great Catholic temptation very often, at least after the Reformation, when we were so defensive against Protestantism. To defend ourselves, we became rational ourselves. And, didn't get us anywhere. Because then we're trying to mimic the same language and methodology, way of knowing that the scientist does, but we're not in competition with it. We're I think, a friendly variation that gives you a whole different viewpoint. That's all.
Thanks be to God. We would like to hear from each of the panelists in whatever order seems best to you. What do you see as the greatest threat to the environment today, to the creation that we are called to steward? What do you think is the greatest threat to that harmony that God has created? We voted, and the scientist will begin.
So there's quite a list of things that are threatening. And the thing about, the more we understand about environmental science and ecology is all of those things are connected together. So it's really hard to just say that's the one problem that we're facing. I think I could boil it down to kind of a short list of the really big ones. So there's energy issues. We have a certain amount of energy, and we have some in long-term storage that we're using up really quickly. And so we're going to run out of that long-term fossil fuels energy, and by using that all up really quickly, we're putting a lot of, we're changing our carbon cycle quite a bit, and we're acidifying our oceans, and we're warming things up, and we're changing weather patterns, and so there's a lot of connections there. There's also a limited amount of fresh water in the world, and it's really, there's shortages in some places more than others, but that's definitely connected to the other. And then we're just taking up a lot of space, so habitat loss, land use changes, having big effects on the rest of the creatures sharing this planet with us. So a lot of extinctions happening. I think those are kind of the big three, if I had to sum it up.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Rabbi Harris?
I think the biggest threat to our environment is that we have lost sight of the difference between what I want and what I need. I think as people of faith, if we could get that straight, we would stop threatening the environment so much. I don't need meat 3 times a day, 7 days a week. I don't. Takes up a whole lot of strain on the environment. I don't need my air conditioning on every day just because it's hot outside. Right? I want those things, but I don't need them. And that goes for, what's that stuff called? That body wash that comes, in the big plastic container versus a bar of soap that disintegrates when you're done with it. I mean, there's so many levels of what I want because it's convenient and I think that it makes my life better versus what I need to be a clean, healthy, balanced human being. And I think that if we could make those distinctions a little better for ourselves, we could do a whole lot of good.
Thank you very much.
I can only build on that. If you look at the rather universal pattern of people like Jesus, Gandhi, Francis, it always came down to living a simple life in this world. And I'm just adding to what you said there, or building on it. I don't think we realize how much we've been seduced by consumerism, by making wants into needs, and we're all in it, me too. But boy, the whole world cannot live like Americans do, or it's over. The whole thing is over. If we just each make a little decision, like the great little personal examples you gave there. All the plastic, plastic is like God, it's eternal. We're stuck with it. It's filling up the oceans, And when you go to the typical supermarket, it feels like half of the products are in plastic. Where is all of this supposed to go? So,
did you know that when you go to the grocery store and you buy apples, you don't have to put them in the plastic bag?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Just
Factually correct.
So anyway, I think we've allowed our lives to become so complex, so needy. And here we have so much, we're still so needy. And most of that need has to do with convenience, you said it, And I'm victim of it too. I'm not apart from this, but we have to at least be free to talk to an intelligent audience like this and be honest. Because very honestly, you often can't say these things in a typical Sunday morning congregation in any of our denominations, which is pretty sad. But thank you for coming on a night like this and allowing us to say these things, which we know might risk offending certain people, or you.
Rabbi Harris, I'd like to come back to you because you've kind of pivoted in an important way toward the idea of how do we take these sort of ephemeral ideas and turn them into concrete changes, concrete choices. Can you tell us a little bit about how you and the community that you're a part of have started to think differently or purchase differently or participate in a life of faith differently, understanding that science and faith work together and understanding that ecology and environmental stewardship is important? What does that look like in your life or in the life of your worshiping congregation?
Well, let me front load by saying I think that there's a whole lot more that we could do. Right? It's not necessarily even, I would say, in the top 3 things that we're consciously worrying about on a day-to-day basis right now. But there are some small examples. Before I arrived in Oklahoma City, it's almost been 5 years, but before I got here, the congregation had made the determination that we only buy free trade coffee. I don't know why or how that came about, but that's in the minutes of our congregation. It's just this one little thing. But when you think about the amount of consumerism that our congregations do engage in, little decisions like that, I think, do make a difference. We have a member of our congregation who started a wonderful nonprofit here in Oklahoma City called Oklahoma City Harvest. His name is Larry Hoekman, and Oklahoma City Harvest goes into schools and nonprofit organizations and builds gardens at no cost to that nonprofit. Gardens where, depending on the environment, depending on where it's built, the people who, the students who go to that school can learn from the start how to plant the seeds, how to care for the garden, how a garden grows, and then they can bring that produce home with them. Or seniors who perhaps, and maybe some of you who go to the YMCA Healthy Living Center over across from Integris Hospital, where there's a garden there that Oklahoma City Harvest has built so that you can work in the garden and keep the garden and then also take the produce to help show how accessible small things like that are and how tied we are to this earth. It's a really wonderful project. So I think that what we look at more in our community, we've done like a survey of the building and those kinds of things that everybody should be doing and that frankly need to be done every few years to see what kind of light bulbs are we using and that kind of stuff. But I think that in Judaism, we especially look at what are the mitzvot, what are the commandments, what are the things that we believe our tradition asks us to do to be in relationship with God. And how do we do those things not necessarily just when we're in the building, but how do we do those things when we're out in the world? What does it look like to do those things when I'm making decisions about purchases in a very private way in addition to that public space or that holy space that we create?
Excellent. Father Rohr and then Dr. Hoekman, I'd like to hear from both of you. Father Rohr, you've spoken already about this idea and the dualism and the Platonic understanding that sometimes leads us as people of faith to be resistant to the idea of environmental stewardship and creation care. Can you talk a little bit more about why you think that is and maybe ways that we can think differently and try to overcome that resistance?
Well, if matter and spirit are split, and we're the people who are into the spirit part, you see, we just don't feel any responsibility. It's a foundational split in our psyche that we're supposed to be concerned about spiritual things. And for me, that's the very split that the Christ overcame in his very body and told us to follow him. I've said for years that the most clever way to avoid following someone is to worship them. You put them on a pedestal, and then you don't really have to imitate them at all. Women always hate this, when you put them on a pedestal as a sign of loving them. And Jesus said, follow me. He never said worship me. So we worship this icon of the synthesis, divinity, humanity, matter, spirit, but it remains split in us. For all practical purposes, the typical Christian thinks of Jesus as only divine, which is heresy, and we think of ourselves as only human, which is heresy. The whole point was to put the two together, first in him and then in us, and we just haven't done that very well. So when anything comes along that it gets as practical as the rabbi just said, well, that's mundane, what? Yeah, and the ego is at work too. This thing challenges every one of us in this room. None of us are off the hook. None of us are purists. I flew here today, so I added to the carbon footprint from Albuquerque. So I'm no purist either. And maybe that's part of the pushback. None of us in this regard can sit on a pedestal of superiority or purity or I'm right. There's all questions that our egos can make. And the one thing the ego hates more than anything else is change. It hates to change. It likes homeostasis, the way things are. So that would be, it sounds so simplistic, but it's in that direction, I think. Yeah.
Excellent, thank you. Dr. Hoekman, how do you understand this problem that some people of faith, particularly in American Christian traditions, are often resistant to the idea of environmental stewardship and creation care? And what can we do about trying to reverse that trend?
Yeah, I think there's several reasons for that. Some of them are historical. Some of them are kind of because of our various political affiliations. Some of them are eschatological. I'll just mention a couple. I think that, especially for those of us who maybe come from a conservative political perspective, the environmental movement kind of came from the other end of the political spectrum. And so in some ways, maybe you view those ideas as threatening or as, that kind of the other side came up with that idea. And I think also that a lot of environmental progress involves making rules about individuals and corporations and kind of where and when we can pollute, things like that. So just as an example, if you stop companies from polluting in a certain way or a certain time, certain things, that that involves regulation. And so if your kind of general political philosophy is less government is better, then there's some opposition there to kind of more regulation. I think eschatology is also part of this. I know some of the Christian traditions that I've been associated with, we have this focus on saving souls, so to speak, and that can sometimes come at the cost of caring for people. And when you care for the environment, you're caring for people. We all rely on the environment for all of our basic needs. If you have this perspective that the world around us is all going to end in sometime soon, and a big fireball, then you're not concerned about caring for the world because it's all gonna burn, so to speak. If that's your eschatological perspective, then it's hard to be concerned about those kind of things. It's hard to sacrifice anything for the here and now of the environment. In general, I should say, and I want to get back to some of the practical suggestions that you made that I love to hear about those. those are kind of different for everyone. You kind of pick our battles. I've been really encouraged talking with students in the last few years, how many of them are really motivated and they want to make a difference and they're willing to sacrifice to make a difference. And so I think this is something that is changing in the church. And I think maybe a thing we can do in general is to sort of to celebrate that God calls us to participate with him in redeeming creation. That we can be a part of that today. That part of God's redemption of the world is that we can be a part of it. And caring for creation can be an act of worship. That's something we can do as part of our service.
Excellent. Rabbi Harris, Father Rohr, in some order, one of the questions that I think comes to the mind almost immediately for people of faith in both of our traditions, in all three of our traditions, when we hear the words God and creation, we often in our heads pivot to one of two passages from the book of Genesis. Some of us go to Genesis 1 and this idea of there's this command and blessing that humanity is to fill the earth and subdue it is one of the translations. Some of us in our head go to Genesis 12 after the flood narrative and the idea that God makes a covenant with all of creation, not just with humanity. Those are two important, difficult, seemingly paradoxical in some ways, texts that tell us about God and how God is at work in the world and how God is at work in and through God's people. When you talk about faith, when you talk about God, when you think about these passages, how do they compare? How do you hold them in tension? How do you understand them to both speak of a God who loves and creates?
So I've already mentioned that we stand on the shoulders of those who came before us, and I actually brought a small commentary on the Genesis 1. I brought a couple of them, but on the Genesis 1 verse, I'm trying to think how you say it in English. Ovadia ben Yaakov Sforno, which is, I guess, Obadiah. That's how it is. Obadiah ben Jacob Sforno. He lived mostly in the 16th century. He died in 1550. And commenting on this idea of fill the earth and master it or subdue it, for instance, he says that this is not a directive to conquer earth with muscular power, but to subdue it by means of man's superior intellect. It means that man is to use his intelligence to prevent predators from invading his habitats, demonstrating the fact that man is superior. We can outwit the beasts. So that notion of what does it mean to subdue or to master, take dominion over, in Jewish understanding, and I'm going to read another piece from Rabbi Kook, who is the first chief rabbi of Israel, who was, by the way, a vegetarian, an ethical vegetarian, because he believed that that was the way in terms of the higher Jewish eating ethic. He wrote that there's no doubt to any intelligent person that when the Torah says to Adam, dominate the fish of the sea and the birds of the skies and any creature that crawls on the ground, it does not mean a domination of a cruel dictator who treats his people harshly in order to bring about his own personal desires, right? Wants versus needs. God forbid that a law of servitude as disgusting as that should be of the ways of the good God, about whom it is said in the Psalms, the world is built with kindness. So I think that if we understand Genesis 1 like that, then we have no conflict with Genesis 12.
Beautiful. Thank you.
You know, I've always, wanted to ask somebody, what is the Hebrew verb there, because our Bibles are now translating it, steward the earth. Maybe that's just being politically correct. I don't know. I failed Hebrew.
V'chivshuha. V'chivshuha.
Do you have?
V'chivshuha.
Do you have any sense?
What should I do with that then?
Yeah.
Take control.
It is pretty
take
strong.
Control, dominate. This one is from Sepharia. What did they say? They said, master it.
So it is. Okay.
I mean, it's a hierarchy.
It is. Yeah. Okay.
Sort of a benevolent hierarchy.
Sure. I mean, so here's the thing. And I loved what you were saying earlier about the different levels of understanding text. Because for sure in Judaism, we have 4 levels of understanding text just right out of the gate. And the Peshat, the simple, first of all, is the lowest level of understanding the literal.
Exactly,
but second of all, is so hard. Because anytime that you translate a word, you're already interpreting
it's
it.
It's already a metaphor.
Right, already.
That's right.
It's already something else. And then beyond that, when we are reading Hebrew, whether we're reading it as second language people, or I can tell you I have a very large Israeli family, from first language speakers as well, whatever you're doing with it, the word didn't exist in another text before this one that we still have written down today. So the only thing to compare it to is what came after this, or intertextually. That's all we've got. So sure, go with that.
I'm really interested in that idea that the writing and interpretation and translation and transcription of Scripture is a form of the kind of gradual revelation that you've spoken about before.
Oh, very much so. So I know that in different branches of or different denominations of Christianity, different churches use different translations. We do too. So for us, the Jewish Publication Society's translation of the Hebrew Scriptures is sort of the standard. But that's not to say that there aren't amazing translations that are done with different intentions. So Everett Fox has one, and I'm so not. I didn't prepare that part. I mean, I must have 5.
You can
easily.
say any name; we will believe you.
Okay, thank you. That's awesome. Woo. So people go into the translations, though, with different intentions. So if my intention is to capture the poetic rhythm of the Hebrew, I'm not going to worry quite as much about, well, what's the literal word here? I want to give you the feel of the rhythm of it. But if my intention is to give you, there's a publisher called Art Scroll, and they do a linear translation. So for all of the ministers who have said to me, well, I didn't do so well in Hebrew, you get an Art Scroll linear translation, and from their perspective, this word equals this word. And they have it right there, right next to each other. You have to read the English from right to left, because Hebrew, goes right to left. So you got to read it from right to left to get it that way. So what's the intention? Every translation is an interpretation, and if you read it in the Hebrew in the original, well, then you have reams of pages of, in the Hebrew, interpretations of what the Hebrew says. That's just how we work as Jews, which is why, like, the scientific inquiry, it makes sense to us. Or, frankly, law makes sense to us, because you want to look into it and try to figure it out, and what did it mean when it was written down? But if it's for all time, then what does it mean today? Because we don't live today how they lived then. And how do we grapple with that? And especially in matters of ecology and environmentalism, where we know more today than we did 200 years ago. So how do we adapt to that? How do we, if scientific discovery is a form of revelation, is a form of God continuing to talk to us today, to give us these insights into how to progress forward in the world when we want more, but what do we need? Then it's all about finding balance. And if that's kind of part of the question, okay, revelation then, knowing more about how we're potentially hurting the environment and seriously hurting the environment. And we know more now. If we're people of faith who say, and we may not all agree that this is what it is, right? So from my faith perspective, scientific understanding is revelation. That's God speaking to me. How do I listen to that and move forward understanding what can be with this new information and what should be if I bring God with me into the future? Because for every technological, scientific advancement that we have ever made as human beings, including, by the way, the wheel, which is technology, and the printing press, which is technology, for every technology we have ever discovered, we have the choice to choose to use it in a blessed way that glorifies God and creation and honors that we are a part of it, and we have a choice not to use it that way. We have a choice about what gets printed on the printing press, and you know what? Some of it is not to honor God. So all of that's a part of it for me.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Father Rohr, I'd like to hear from you a little bit more about this idea from Genesis 12, that God
That's
exists.
what I wanted to talk on.
Excellent. I knew I liked you.
It's so important that you bring that up because it wasn't pointed out to most of us at the covenant with Noah is specifically to all of creation. And you know, this story that we all grew up with, the beautiful story of Noah's Ark, just the fact that God would bother to take the animals on board. Apparently, animals are savable too, huh? Now that's good Franciscan spirituality, all right. But the history of human treatment of animals is, love is of one piece. How you love is how you love. And you can't say, I love this part and I don't love that part. It pollutes the whole process, you know. If you would allow your soul hatred toward any creature, then you've allowed your soul hatred. And that's going to bleed over into other areas of your life. When we teach contemplation, we say, how you do anything is how you do everything. And what you have to learn, sort of like Eckhart Tolle taught a lot of you back 15 years ago or so, you know, how you're living this moment is as good an indication of who you are as anything. And if we don't make a covenant with all of creation, but we pare it down to, well, just with other white middle-class American Protestants or whatever we are, we're living in such a model of scarcity that we're certainly not in the ocean of infinite mercy anymore. We're not in the ocean of grace anymore. So I think the covenant with Noah is such a beautiful balancing with the original words to Adam and Eve. But most of us, that wasn't pointed out to us. It was a pretty story about animals for kids. But read the whole text. It's quite prophetic, I think. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Dr. Hoekman?
Even here in Genesis 1, the verse, Genesis 1:28 there, God blessed them and said, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue or rule it. Just a few verses back, the birds and the fish are given that same blessing to be fruitful and multiply. And I think it goes to your point that we and the rest of creation are all existing under God's care and sovereignty and are blessed by Him and are all called to worship together. That's part of who we are.
Excellent, absolutely. We'll start with Dr. Hoekman and kind of make our way back this direction. We have gotten many, 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 many questions about climate change and the role that we play in it or not and how. I think one of the best ways of asking this is going to be the one that I read and understand that we hear all of you and we're condensing. To the panel, what agreement do you find in science and faith regarding why and how we should respond to climate change? What agreement is there in science and faith that informs the way that we do and should respond to climate change? What are some examples of that?
You to go first.
Please.
The things that are coming to mind are not specific to climate change, so I'm trying to... Can you just read the question one more time?
Absolutely. And we will take any knowledge that you wish to drop on us. What agreement in science and faith exists that shape the way that we can and should respond to climate change? And what are some examples of that?
Let me start with that climate change is having effects, and this is always the case for things that when we change the environment, the effects that we have on the environment, whether you look at them in negative light or positive, when we're changing the environment, that it has consequences for people. There aren't just sort of environmental problems. Environmental problems have consequences for people. They're always problems for people. That's why they're problems, and we're talking about them. And climate change is at a global scale, and so it's an easy one to, at least for people in really affluent societies, to maybe convince ourselves that even if this is happening, it's not really affecting me very much, and maybe I'll be okay, or my immediate circle here will be okay. The effects of climate change, just like all kinds of environmental effects, they influence people who are the least powerful, those who are poor and on the margin. They're the ones who suffer first. They're the ones who are suffering now, when we can kind of talk about this thing like, is it happening, is it not happening, who's to blame? We can have those sort of conversations about it. The people who are vulnerable are suffering and are already paying a price for this. And I guess one way that we could respond as a church would be to confess corporate sin about environmental degradation. I think one of the consequences is that I want to use the word damaging. Climate change is not in and of itself a damaging, and we have changed the system, and it hurts some people more than others. But when we degrade the environment in other ways, it diminishes the witness that creation has. Creation bears witness to some of God's attributes. We see God's majesty, God's beauty, God's complexity in the creation. And when we destroy parts of it, we're diminishing that witness that creation can have. And in that way, I think it's something we should confess as sin.
Excellent, thank you. Rabbi Harris, what agreement do you find in science and faith that shape the way that we can and should respond to climate change?
So I tell my students that using the resources around them is not cheating. So I pulled out my phone to use the resources that I have. There are different movements of Judaism. We are not denominations. We're different expressions of Judaism. You're Jewish, that's it. And some people choose to express their Judaism in organized religious fashion. So you probably heard of Orthodox Judaism. I'm a part of Reform Judaism. There's also Conservative Judaism and several others. The Reform Jewish branch of Judaism, so if you think of Judaism as a tree, the branch that is Reform, that is the part that I'm a part of, has taken on environmental causes as a religious cause. We have an organization in Washington, D.C. called the Religious Action Center. It's an activist and advocacy organization that's a part of the Reform movement that lobbies Congress and does educational pieces, does all kinds of stuff to advocate for different causes, and environmental causes is one of them. So I just pulled up some of the statements that have come out of the RAC, R-A-C, the Religious Action Center of Reform Judaism. And one that I'm going to read you excerpts from is actually from 2000. And I think it's interesting to read it in 2017 because you see the idea of idealism. And we can look back at what was stated in 2000, not actually by the RAC, but actually by the rabbinic body, a different organized group within Reform Judaism. You can see the idealism that's expressed there as to what we should do. So here we go. Set aside the concerns of special interest and encourage the development of alternative energy sources. Close a loophole allowing sport utility vehicles, minivans, and pickup trucks to meet lower fuel economy standards than cars. Raise CAFE standards for all passenger vehicles to a minimum of 45 miles per gallon by 2010 and 65 miles per gallon by 2020. Support investment in environmentally friendly energy technologies. Phase out all subsidies for coal, oil, and nuclear industries by 2005. Provide tax credits for investments to make homes and buildings more energy efficient. Create progressively strict emissions standards, including carbon dioxide emissions for all power plants, regardless of fuel source or age. In 2001, one of the bodies of the Reform movement adopted policy opposing drilling in the Arctic refuge. You get a sense, you can guess where my movement stands on the Keystone Pipeline and other related matters. So, I mean, as a movement, we take on these big ideas and say, we know it's harming the environment, but I live in Oklahoma now. And I think that brings up a lot of questions of balance then. I mean, you heard what that was. So how do we, Jews, by the way, you might not have known this, there's not a lot of us in Oklahoma. You might have noticed, but California, New York, Chicago. So in these areas, in these geographic areas in the United States where energy sources are not always on the most progressive side of what's happening around the world, our voices are so small. And not only that, but for the small number of Jews that are here, we've got pocketbooks invested. And so now we have to start looking again at balance. But that's an example of some of the things from my movement.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Father Rohr, faith, science, climate change. Okay. Where do you find the agreement?
Let me try. I think both fields would have to agree, science and religion, that we both think we should do the truth, right? Science approaches that one way. Now, we would add to that, I would think most religious people, not just to do the truth, but to do the truth with love. I don't know that a scientist has to do that, but I would think a better scientist would try to do something that's going to better the world and better the earth. It always bothers me when I hear the discussions or the debates, even on the evening news, people feel if they can disprove that humans are not the primary cause of climate change, well, then we can forget it. It seems I don't care how much we know it's bad, and we're all agreed on that. So why do we suddenly free ourselves from any responsibility? Because we're not the primary cause. All we know is all the indicators are it's moving fast in this one direction. So if we're going to do the truth and do the truth with love, it seems like we'd all want to jump on board instead of this, again, dualistic argument. Is human the primary cause or is it not? I don't care. I really don't. We better do something. And if we're going to be people of love, then I think we should be out in front, trying to love this earth and love the next generation. I don't know what it was like here in Oklahoma, but we hardly had a winter in New Mexico this year. There was no winter. Unbelievable. Anyway.
Oh, absolutely. Rabbi Harris and Dr. Hoekman, you've mentioned already that none of this happens in a vacuum. And we live in Oklahoma, and many of us benefit directly or indirectly from oil and natural gas. They are big employers in our state, and they affect our lives in many different ways. So, understanding that, what advice about creation care would you give to a person of faith who finds employment and, frankly, may find passion in their career at a local oil or natural gas company?
I don't think that oil and natural gas is bad and evil. I don't think. I think that when we find that there are new ways of doing things that could be better for the earth and the environment, exploring those things and trying to move in that direction is really important. So I think that what I would say is there are multiple, and actually Father Rohr, I think, said this, that we're all carrying multiple values. It's also a value to feed our families. It's also a value to be contributing members of society. It's also a value to make the decision as to where we give. In Judaism, we call it tzedakah, which is very similar. If you've heard Imam Inchasi speak, he talks about a similar concept in Islam, where it's not charity. It is the amount that we are commanded to give to make the world a better place, not necessarily to the religious institution. So how do I balance where I'm making conscious, intentional choices about supporting the world with my resources, which include my time and my talents, but also with my tzedakah, with my charitable giving, and to look again back at that big picture, because the big picture is important.
Thank you very much. Dr. Hoekman, what advice about creation care would you give to a believer, to a person of faith who finds themselves employed in fossil fuel kinds of industries? That's not unusual in Oklahoma City in particular. How do we hold these things in tension and do so faithfully?
Yeah, I would agree that I don't think stopping the use of fossil fuels completely today is the solution anyone is advocating for. I feel like there's it's more about sort of thinking together about some of the consequences of the way we run our economy and the way that we run our food production system and our transportation system, and what are the ways that we want to try to mitigate some of the consequences of the way that we're doing it. And as we look to the future, what are we going to do about the finite resources we're using up? So I just think having a conversation that has a long-term and a future-oriented perspective, one that has at the front of our mind, what is the world going to be like for our kids and our grandkids and their grandkids? I don't think that we need to shut down fossil fuel companies. Like no one's advocated. I think that I would much rather, though, we have a conversation about what are the things that we really value, and I think starting with some shared facts that we can all agree on is a good. I mean, I'm a rational kind of, let's use the evidence to make decisions kind of thinker, and so that's my preference. And it often feels like many of the arguments are mostly distractions that are stopping us from getting to a point where we can talk about these are the things that we value, and here are the ways that we're going to promote those values, and think about that in a more than just a what's the 4-year horizon on that, what's the 10-year, let's think about a 100-year horizon and make choices that are going to be beneficial not just in our lifetime, but for our generations that are coming.
Excellent, thank you. Father Rohr and Rabbi Harris, with us in the room as part of a conference that begins this evening and extends into Tuesday are more than 100 young pastors and seminary students and university students who are studying theology. How would you hope that that young generation of clergy can influence their churches with regard to this conversation about science and theology?
Can I put in a little word on this one you just asked them
Please.
about it sometimes shocks people how lethal both Jesus and Paul are on law. Now, here's my interpretation of why that's true. Most of us, I'm sure we all want to be law-abiding. And thank God we have policemen. I'm not against law. Thank God we have lawyers to protect us from law. But if you read Corinthians, I didn't realize that would sound funny, but I guess it did. If you read 1 Corinthians, when he lists the charisms of the Spirit, he lists one that I think has been far undeveloped in the Christian churches. He calls it the discernment of spirits. He's appealing, the Jesuits in our church are very good at it. Pope Francis is expert at this. Law is always all or nothing. You're either mandated, you must do it, or it's a mortal sin if you do it in the Catholic Church. There's no in between. What discernment is teaching you much more moral subtlety, much more nuancing of what is the motive? What's going on here? Where did this come from? Where is it going? If you don't teach Christians discernment, I think they come up with these black and white approaches to gas and coal and oil. And why does it have to be either absolutely forbidden or absolutely mandated? Why can't we grow as moral people? I don't know how many of you have seen that Shusaku Endo's version of the Christians in Japan. It's a movie out now called Silence. I wrote a review on it for Huffington Post. And for me, from beginning to end, the reason the movie and the novel is a masterpiece, it's a whole story of moral ambiguity. And how living inside of moral ambiguity, great people rise to the occasion, never again knowing they're standing on a pedestal of perfection. Till the very last scene of that movie, you suffer the moral ambiguity. I don't think we've been trained to think that way. We've got to be absolutely right all the time or feel terrible about our sin. I think we have to start teaching Christians the discernment of spirits. The gift of weighing, praying, listening, waiting, reading other scholars in the tradition and saying, this is what I think I have to do. Let me end with this. I think what characterizes evil is always absolutely certain it's right. Evil never suffers any self-doubt, all right? You and I have been called to live in faith. Faith is an entirely different dimension than evil, obviously, where I don't have the luxury of being absolutely certain I'm right. I have to live with this moral ambiguity of, well, we need coal, just to apply it to this. But is there some way, we call this third force thinking or third way thinking, of not just standing inside of the dilemma of all or nothing thinking. Any of you who are in 12-step programs, they say that's what characterizes an addict, is they're all or nothing thinkers. And I think we're an addictive church. It's all or nothing, and there's no subtlety, there's no nuancing, there's no suffering the pain and holding some of the pain of my own imperfection. I don't have to be perfect. I can still do my little bit of good. And you've heard it from many people, so often the enemy of the perfect is the good, or the other way around too. So anyway, it's that would be my main response to that. We've got to suffer things a little more. Does that sound right? And not want to have the glib answer that closes down the discussion at the cocktail party conversation, because I know I'm absolutely right. I call that the sin of certitude. And you and I are called to live in faith, not walking around with absolute certitudes all the time. Well, anyway.
To the seminarians or the...
Okay, we're going to do it like this. We'll come from Dr. Hoekman, and then we'll head back this direction. We do have, as we've mentioned, a lot of young clergy in the room, and Father Rohr will be spending his time with them after this. We've got young clergy, we've got seminarians, we've got students. We have my grandfather, who's been a pastor for like 4 times longer than I've been alive, and is a beautiful man and a pastor. Dr. Hoekman, what gives you hope for the future of this conversation? And then I'd like to hear from Rabbi Harris and Father Rohr as well. What gives you hope for the future?
I think I've already said it, but I have hope in students that I interact with that they're passionate about this, about it seems like they're more willing than I am often to make difficult decisions and to change. Students they're young and flexible. They can change their lifestyle. They're at a point in their life where they're willing and able to make decisions about how they're living their lives and how we care for creation. And that's encouraging to me. Sorry, this is a 2-part question. What is encouraging to you, and
what gives you hope for the future? Where do you see this going, maybe for that next generation?
Yeah, and another thing that encourages me interacting with students, not only their willingness to make those kind of changes, but their willingness to listen to different sides of a story. When we tackle these different environmental issues, their willingness to hear the facts behind it, to try to get the facts straight, and then to think about the perspective of different stakeholders. All these environmental problems, not just climate change, but all of these different problems that we talk about, they're hard problems. We wouldn't be talking about them if they were easy to solve. There are different people with different things at stake. There are people with livelihoods at stake often, and so. But their willingness to consider these different stakeholders and really try to understand what some of the hard trade-offs are when we think about these, it gives me hope that there's a next generation coming with a will to solve some of these problems.
Excellent, thank you.
So for at least the young ministers and the seminarians who are in the room, you may be too young to have already had this experience, but I also see a lot of people in the room who have had this experience. You need to leave, you need to get up and go, and you start looking for your glasses, right? And you find them here. Like they were right there all along. You knew you weren't wearing them, but you don't know where they are, and you put them on. It's like, oh, there you are. I can see you now. I actually am better without them with the lights, but you get the idea. As religious leaders, frankly, as lay people as well, but as religious leaders, I would challenge you to think about what are the glasses of your faith that you ought to never take off. They should be single vision lenses. So I've heard Father Rohr talk about love and a totality of love, for instance. In the way that I understand the commandment to love in Torah, I understand it as treat people with a mixture of justice and mercy. That's how I define and understand the biblical commandment to love, So if I'm going to put on those glasses, and that's going to be the precept of my faith, that's going to be how I strive, and sometimes I fail, but how I strive to lead or to teach, then it doesn't matter what window I'm looking through if those glasses are always on, if I stick them in as contact lenses and they're not leaving my eyes. So that when questions of policy come up, for instance, I'm not looking through the lenses of what political party I belong to. I'm looking through the lenses of love. Or when questions come up, as the example was about where somebody works, I'm not looking through the lenses of environmentalism. I'm looking through the lenses of justice and mercy, of love. And everything that I see as a religious leader, I lose my glasses sometimes, and I fail. But the idea is to know what that is. And I would challenge you to figure that out and to do that and to keep those lenses on so that whatever window you're looking through, you bring first and foremost your faith, not what you think your faith says, because that changes, but what your faith is.
What's giving me a lot of hope right now is this millennial generation. I've given a number of retreats in the last 2 years. We have a millennial director of our center in Albuquerque, and so he's gathering like-minded spiritual entrepreneurs, I would call them. I got invited last October to Google in Silicon Valley.
I've heard of it.
By the by the staff, and then the executives heard I was coming, and they said, "Can we come too?" And then the Apple executives came over, and they sat in on it. They were all younger people, and I could talk to them about spiritual things with a depth that my generation just didn't have. That we were so defensive about anybody who'd say anything differently. There's a kind of openness in the millennial generation. I know that's a generalization and they're always dangerous, but I know my generation was not that way, They just don't have the prejudices, the narrow-mindedness that my generation had, that we thought it was black and white thinking again. And these were spiritual entrepreneurs who weren't afraid of religion, although my impression at Google and Apple is most of them aren't church-going people. But boy, do they care about the future. Do they care about helping people? It was like meeting a new species of human being. A completely different work ethic. They can work at 3 in the morning whenever they want to work. But most of them work 40 and 50 hours a week on their project, not getting any more salary just because they believe in what they're doing. That's exciting to me. And I'm seeing so much of that. These are some of the best people coming to our center who want to be taught the contemplative mind because they know the calculative mind made the money, but it didn't make them happy and wasn't helping them to help the world. So I really do. Because of the younger ones, I have a lot of hope right now. Yeah.
Beautiful.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's your panel on creation, care, and the environment.